Good afternoon, and welcome everyone to the second day of the T20 Summit here. We are in Milano. We are at the Bocconi University. A warm welcome also to all of you that are following connected online on our platform. So today we're going to discuss the policy recommendation of the T20 on infrastructure and trade and on health. At the center of this session, there will be the curtain raises speech, a well-awaited speech by the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva. But I do not want to anticipate too much because we are ready to start discussing how to deliver for people, planet, and prosperity. And we start with a conversation with Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who's an international authority when it comes to sustainable development, in conversation with Samir Saran, who's president of the Observer Research Foundation from India. They are both already connected, so I leave the floor to Samir for kicking off the conversation. Welcome both.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here at the T20 Summit and to have partnered with ISPI through a very intricate and intensive program through this year, through the pandemic hit year. But I am glad that we could all meet, convene, and discover ideas and solutions that may benefit us all. One of the most important themes, obviously, that we need to find responses to is on the infrastructure deficit, on building up habitats, building up communities, building up countries. And there could be no better person than Professor Jeffrey Sachs to speak about it. So welcome, Professor Sachs, to this conversation.
Thanks a lot. Great to be with you, Samir, and great to be part of the T20 process.
Professor Sachs, we know that infrastructure leads to economic growth and it leads to general prosperity. We also know how we build up in the future is going to shape the green transitions, is going to leave a footprint or respond to the climate challenge. How do you match the imperatives of prosperity and sustainability with the green imperative that all of us today must confront now?
I think the answer is that green and digital gives us guideposts for where we need to go, and the SDGs and the Paris Agreement give us an overarching framework. We do have to have a future energy system that is net zero emission, even negative emission in the second half of this century. And so the first guidepost is that as countries build their energy systems, they need to be building decarbonized energy systems, wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, and the applications that go along with those primary energy sources. We know that digital can be a great friend, a leapfrog technology for development. It can bring people into systems of education, health, governance, finance, payments in ways that were not achievable even 5 or 10 years ago. I have tremendous hopes for what online education and telemedicine and other applications can mean for people who have really been essentially excluded from those public services in the past. The big challenge that I see repeatedly is the financing challenge, which is not so much what to build or even how to build it, but how to pay for it. When people are poor, savings are low, government revenues are low, and yet capital needs are enormous. And we need to find ways to invest ahead of the curve, understanding that those investments will, of course, be a key part of future economic development, and that in and of itself will help pay for those investments. I think one basic point, which is obvious, but I want to underscore it, is we need to invest simultaneously in infrastructure and in people. If we invest in electrification and digital, but not in children in their health, nutrition, and education, we're going to come to a bad place in the end where infrastructure might be there, but the skills won't be there to build the economic base on top of that infrastructure. So the biggest puzzle, in my view, in sum, is the financing puzzle. We have countries that need a lot of capital, both human and physical. The returns on that capital, socially, equitably, and in basic economic terms, I think will be enormous. But the financing is pretty brutal right now. The multilateral development finance system is a small fraction of what it really should be. The rich countries can borrow seemingly whatever they want at near zero interest rates, whereas poor countries are already facing debt crisis. They're facing exclusion from markets. They're facing 5 or 10% interest rates, whereas rich countries are at 0 to 2% interest rates. So I believe that a fundamental transformation of the financial architecture with a great deal more development financing, a much larger role of development banking is crucial to build the green and digital infrastructure that we're really almost compelled to build as a framework for the future.
Professor Sachs, you in many ways identified the single most important area we need to focus on as a G20 group and also as a global community. Let me ask you about the second challenge that I see emerge in the previous years. There is also politics at play. Infrastructure is highly political. We have a Chinese system, the BRI. We have the EU-led the 10 effort. We have the US Build Back Better World and the Blue Dot Network. We have India's Sagar Mala network. We have these competing infrastructure investment projects, programs, initiatives around the world. Many of them are vying for political relevance, political clout, are trying to shape ideologies, are trying to shape future trajectories of countries. Are we in age of confrontation around the infrastructure development of large parts of the world, or can we create complementarities? Are you an optimist on working together to build a world that benefits all?
I just have the image of the bridge. The BRI builds one half the bridge, Europe builds another half, and they don't connect, and we end up with the two worthless half bridges rather than connecting them together. You know, geopolitics is a bit of a fantasy land, unfortunately, right now. The United States says, even in its documents, we're the primary country. We need to keep our primacy. China's a challenge to the international system. This way of thinking about things is not only silly, to use a kind of silly word, but extraordinarily dangerous. The us versus them mentality, in the end, could get us all killed, to put it in a blunt way. We need a multipolar world, certainly. We need a world in which India, China, European Union, United States, African Union, and others are seeing each other as parts of an interconnected, multipolar world. The United States still has an illusion that it somehow runs something called the free world, whatever that is, and that it naturally dominates. It tries to build alliances. It goes to India, to Australia, to Japan, says we're the Quad so that we can oppose China. I'm against all this thinking, frankly, and I don't think in a naive way. I find this alliance thinking, this balance of power thinking, to be the naive part. Because as an economist, I look at the underlying data, I look at the demographics, I look at the technology, and I'm completely convinced no region can run the world, should run the world, need run the world, or will run the world. So in this sense, we should understand we are nodes of an interconnected, multipolar world, and we should not see Building Back Better or the European program or BRI as threats to each other. we should see them as interconnecting a global space where interconnection is a huge benefit. If we want a clean energy system, make a connected grid. Make it large so that the electrons can service a large area, especially with these intermittent energy sources. Transport doesn't make sense if the road stops at the border. We know that from different histories of rail being built on different gauges, and then you spend days shifting merchandise from one rail gauge to the next, and it's mind-boggling. I can understand where this thinking comes from, but truly, we need neighbors actually interconnected in a peaceful way. China and India, I know there are tensions, but truly, if these two great civilizations were working in harmony, that would be a wonderful thing for themselves and for the world. And I could name countless more cases where neighbors just need to get along.
No, I mean, just on that point, I think the world should know that India and China co-own the new development bank, and indeed are the two largest owners of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank that's working in this space. Before I turn it back to the moderator, one quick question. Do you think in Glasgow and in Rome, the G20 and COP26, we are going to see an appetite to reprice capital so that commercial flows can complement development finance, and large amount of green capital can help in the building up of countries that still have to reach their level of infrastructure development that is needed for prosperous living?
You know, private capital wants to go to developing countries, but it wants to go at 5% or 10% interest rates, which would kill these countries. So we need to have really a systematic understanding that when we call green bonds or SDG bond issuances, that they mean terms that are manageable for long-term development. I would say no country should be taking on debt that's more than, say, 200 basis points higher than the low-cost borrowers. Why punish the poor countries with crushing debt burdens in the future? And we are not there yet in the G20 understanding of this. We're not there yet in the capital market understanding, because capital markets want to make money, frankly. They're not into development per se. But we can change the nature of financing for much larger flows at much lower costs and really get this job done. That, to my mind, is the bottom line of what we need coming out of the G20 process this year and going into the G20 in Indonesia, and what we need for COP26. We need the financing to build the systems that are going to bring us the future that we want.
Well, Professor Jeffrey
Sachs. Thank you so much, Professor Sachs. Let me turn it back to our colleague in.
Thanks again, also from here from Milan, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, and also Samir Saran for this.